Good morning, everyone. Who needs a budget? We don't need a budget. We don't need a budget. We are just going to continue down this road of unchecked spending in the House of Commons, and we're going to do it by app. They can vote by app, and we'll get to that in a minute. But here is the Trudeau government reportedly surpasses 2 years without a federal budget. I think it's 277 days. That's the number I saw. But Trudeau government reportedly surpasses 2 years without a federal budget. What to do with a drunken sailor on a sinking boat? Yes, indeed. And how much debt will we incur when the spending is, or the debt is cheap, right? Like the lending is at 0% or very low at this point. The interest rates are very low. And what happens when the interest rates rise and this record debt that we've laden for ourselves comes back to bite us in the butt? What happens is the cost to borrow the money increases, and the cost or the amount of money we have for social programs and other programs and other spending that we do, subsidies and whatever, is squeezed because of the increased cost to carry the debt. Okay, here's Laurie Goldstein, and he talks about my Toronto Sun column. Trudeau Liberals now hold the record for failing to deliver a budget, 720 days and counting, longer than it took the previous Liberal government to deliver annual budgets during World War II and after 9/11. Yeah. And really, I talked about this yesterday as well. When there's a crisis, you don't max out your credit card in order to give those borrowed dollars to charity. But that's what our government is doing, maxing out the credit card to give the money to international programs for aid and other things. We're broke. We're flat broke and borrowing money to do this. They don't seem to care. They don't care. Pierre Poilievre says, let's face it, Trudeau's delaying the budget because he wants the election over before people learn how desperately broke he's made us. We have an inkling of how desperately broke we've been made, and it doesn't seem like that matters at all. In fact, it looks like Trudeau's on track for a majority. There's nothing out there that I've seen that says to me there's going to be a mass exodus from the Liberal Party to the Conservative Party. And we'll talk about Pierre O'Toole, Mr. O'Toole in just a minute. But there's nothing I've seen that says a mass exodus to CPC. Nothing I've seen says mass exodus to PPC. Nothing I've seen that says really there's any political movement at all. And I'll show you what Jagmeet Singh is saying about this once we get through O'Toole. He gets in on the Women's Day, the International Women's Day stuff, and he uses that to push his agenda, but I'll get to that in a minute. First, Aaron O'Toole. NDP House leaders say the Conservatives have adopted a strategy of blocking the government's legislative agenda, no matter the bill, a strategy he fears is giving the Liberals an excuse to go to the polls. So the NDP are saying, oh, the Conservatives are forcing our hand, and we're going to have to agree with the Liberals to call an election, and because these Conservatives are making us do it, right? A pandemic election, they'll hang that around the necks of O'Toole and the rest as well, right? How dare they gum up our legislative branch, and that's why they'll ask for a majority, right? And again, I haven't seen anything that tells me that there's going to be any mass, I don't think there's going to be a big change, and O'Toole is falling on deaf ears as far as talking to the Conservative base. They're not interested in what he's selling. Here is the Liberals, and they are going to be changing the election rules to allow for more mail-in ballots and a 3-day polling period. So 3 days to vote and mail-in ballots and all sorts of crazy stuff. Okay, this explains it pretty well. The first part's in English. The second part is dubbed over English with him speaking French, but it's very clear. So here we go.
That should an election be required, a federal election held during the current pandemic can be even more safe and more secure. Would temporarily supplement provisions of the Canada Elections Act in support of a safe, secure, and accessible election during the pandemic, should one be required.
Bill C-19 contains 4 elements, which I will explain in further detail. First of all, a polling period of 3 days, a safe polling period for residents of long-term care homes, also increased powers for the Chief Electoral Officer to adapt to the pandemic, and the strengthening of other measures to have mail-in voting.
This legislation proposes spreading
mail-in voting, more power for officials on the ground to deal with the pandemic. Is that what we saw in St. John's, where they just shut down voting for the city and said, don't worry about it, we'll get to you guys when we can get to you. And, it'll be just fine. The irregularities in the Newfoundland election are problematic, for lack of a better term. So, and mail-in voting, we saw how that went in the United States on November 3rd. The preferred candidate, Joe Biden, won, it seems, and well, everybody really likes how he's governing, right? Everybody really enjoys the Syria strike. Everybody did not get their $2,000 if they were in the United States. There's a whole bunch of stuff that was promised and then not delivered. And it seems like his mental faculties aren't exactly all there. He seems a little lost. He seems to not be able to hold a press conference. So there are some real issues with, and mail-in voting isn't responsible for Biden's deficiencies. I'm not trying to imply that, but they put in a candidate that had those real questions and who didn't really campaign. So that's a very interesting thing to push, right? We saw the irregularities with the number of ballots got at 3:00 in the morning after the polls were kind of curving over, and then the jump up of all those ballots for Joe Biden, and they found them under the table. It was crazy, right? All that stuff. That's doesn't seem like a secure voting situation. It doesn't seem like a really good representation of democracy. It seems like what happens in places like Venezuela, right? Like that's what that seems like. It doesn't seem like what should be happening in a democratic country, and yet they'll continue the facade of it, right? They'll continue to propagate that. Yes, it's totally above board, and this is how we keep people safe. And you heard that language all through this presentation here. The cornerstone of it is we want to keep you safe. They say, right? I don't know. How about we protect my civil liberties and my rights first, and I'll deal with keeping me safe. Right? If the government is looking at using this crisis, right? Never let a good crisis go to waste, right? To push your agenda further. Tim Caddington now moderates a question and answer with the leader of the official opposition. This is Oakville Chamber. Oakville is not a small city, right? There's 8,000 people following. They're following 4,000 people. 8,000 people follow these guys. 2 likes and 2 retweets and 3 comments after 3 days, 4 days. This is March 5th, right? I looked at it 3 or 4 times. I was like, this is really, like, maybe there's no link here. I'm not sure. Like, I'm not sure why there's nothing. There's no engagement. There's no nothing around this. Isn't that odd? Seems odd to me. Seems like there's no indication that anybody's interested in anything that this guy's got to say. And doesn't he kind of look like Joe Biden in this picture? I think he kind of looks like Joe Biden. Odd. It's very interesting. Okay, Jagmeet Singh. There's a lot to unpack. I actually started the show with this first, and then I started talking so long that I thought I wanted to talk about the budget first, because I think that the budget is more impactful. I think it's interesting that Jagmeet Singh is getting in on International Women's Day, and he's using International Women's Day to drive his policy, to drive the by that I mean his socialist agenda. So here's the tweet. Anyway, he was on International Women's Day with a little women icon. We can #choose to challenge the inequities magnified by the pandemic. Our recovery must be a feminist one that advances gender equality, along with racial, indigenous, economic, social, and environmental justice. International Women's Day. Okay, so what does indigenous justice or indigenous equity have to do necessarily with women? How does economic equity or economic justice have to do with women specifically? How about social justice or equity, social equity, racial equity? What does that have to do with women? Why are you using women as like a trailhead, as a leading kind of charge into the rest of this stuff, right? Like, and women not women generally fall for this, but there's 465 likes, which I think is light on his kind of stuff like this. But how exactly does this list of equities and justice reflect feminist? I don't know. I don't understand exactly. Anyway, Jagmeet Singh carries on. He says, women are facing the highest rates of unemployment. Businesses owned by women are taking twice as long to recover, and domestic violence against women is on the rise. Justin Trudeau must do better. Okay, I would love to see the data that they've got to make these statements. I think that it's interesting that when people say women are facing the highest rates of unemployment, I've heard from a few people yesterday in the comments, somebody was saying like, my department is 2 men or 2 women and a man, and I got let go because of COVID, and the 2 women stayed. Like, that's weird, right? Like, that's an interesting anecdotal thing. And I read a report yesterday that a much higher percentage of women haven't returned to work, whereas a much lower percentage of men have returned to work. And I was talking about letting women do what they want to do, and if they have the means to stay home and they want to stay home, why is that not celebrated? It's a job just like a very difficult job, especially when you've got to advocate for your kids and contact teachers and do all the homework and get the doctor's appointments set up and, you know, run the household. It's a very big job. So I just don't understand how using women are facing the highest rates of unemployment as a proof that we need a feminist recovery, and that the feminist recovery needs to advance gender and racial and indigenous and economic and social equity and environmental justice. For the women, man, it's for the women. Sure. Can the women compete against just women, or do we have to have them competing against men? And is that a bigot thing to say? Or whatever, right? And if you're talking to Jagmeet Singh, that would offend him, right? He would be very offended by that. But it's all for the women, apparently. I think it's a Trojan horse, right? You use the women as the hook on the reel, and then get the rest of all of it connected, right? Like, and you didn't realize it, but he listed it, right? It's right there, right after the feminist thing, all of that, unbelievable. Anyway, carrying on, Jagmeet Singh says, New Democrats call for affordable universal childcare. Partnership with Indigenous women to implement the missing and murdered Indigenous women inquiries call for justice, an end to gender-based violence, and a plan to do it. So Justin Trudeau's failed because he hasn't called for an end to gender-based violence, but you did, so we should follow you? Come on. Really? And the universal childcare thing, is that like servicing women, or is that servicing the need to get women back in the workforce for your numbers, for your political ideology, not for what's good for women, right? If what's good for women, or each individual woman, is decided by her, why are you telling them what they need to do, right? Like, it seems really interesting that, you know, your childcare call is meant to help women by getting them back into work, you know. And fine, if women want to work, that's fine. But what if their version of work is raising their kids and building their family? Why is that not celebrated? And I know I just said that, but it's crazy. Okay, MPs can now vote via app for the House of Commons, for bills in the House of Commons. So here's Colin Coral. I've got that terribly wrong. He said, sorry, Colin. He says, now MPs can vote on their iPhone while laying on their couch in their underwear. Very historic CTV. An historic first for MPs voting by app starts Monday. Oh yeah, I downloaded my app that, you know, just MPs can have, and I'm voting on everything in the House of Commons. If I can do it, you can too, right? So we can't have direct democracy, but MPs can vote by app. Great. Now Telford can do it for the Liberals from her desk. Starting today, members of Parliament can cast votes online. Yeah. I wonder what the security is for that. Like, I wonder what kind of, like, if you work in a law office, then you have security on your phone, and some law offices only allow iPhones because of the level of security you can have on an iPhone. Some only allowed Blackberries for a while because of the servers. I'm interested, just like because I'm a tech geek, kind of. I'm interested in excuse me. I'm interested in what kind of security they would have. Like, could you have multiples? What about the idea of cloning? Like, what if you had a techie friend who knows how to clone a phone, right? What if a techie friend from, you know, who knows where, and who knows how to clone a phone really well, right? Like, say they know people who build phones or something. Who knows? Hypothetical, right? How easy would it be, just like the Toronto police in the tow truck situation, to have your phone cloned to have a look at the inner workings of the Canadian government? How difficult would that be? Yay, everybody can vote from home today. And there's no other security concerns about this. Everything's just happy. And look at how happy Miss Freeland is, right? Like, but I've got some serious questions. Like, how is this safe? How is this, how does this work in our traditional governance? To have members in the House of Commons to vote on bills, etc. Are people going to be mandated to come into the House of Commons to do the work, or can they now just choose to do it virtually forever? Right? I'm worried I might get sick, so I'm just going to stay. I'm not sick, and nobody who's close to me that I know of is sick, but I'm worried that I might get sick, and so I'm going to stay home, and that's valid these days. So I think that's a bit of a cop-out, right? If you're an elected representative, your job is to represent, right? And what's the sunset on this? Like, we'll use the app until, when? Right? We'll use the app forever? And with no sunset, with no automatic sunset, no automatic people having to vote for it to continue to be used, it seems like it's becoming an option. And it seems like everything's moving online, right? Good luck getting an in-person anything in the next 10 years. It's going to be more and more difficult. Remember this, MP must repay public $9,391. The board noted Ms. Rantansi's lack of cooperation during the review of this matter. So she hired her sister and then gave a big severance package and then got caught and then didn't cooperate with the investigation. And now she has to pay back the severance that she gave her sister for having to leave the position that she was in because she was sisters with this MP. Very interesting stuff. Kielburger, speaking of family, right? Let's answer your question with a question. Why is a private organization steeped in grift lobbying to administer $1 billion in public money via a shady arm wholly unequipped to do so? Now, this is yesterday's National Post article saying We Charity's legal advisor, Parliament, should not have the right to summon people under threat of arrest. But they do, though. Doesn't matter what the legal expert says. The Parliament should have a right to. The fact is they do have the right to. And the fact is they voted to summon Kielburger's brothers to testify in the We Charity scandal. So this isn't over, right? Unanimous ethics committee vote to summon Kielburger brothers to testify. Oh, you're going to vote. You're going to testify. And if not, you're going to be arrested by the sergeant at arms, says Pierre Polyev. So that's interesting. Like, that's an interesting turn for this. Like, and I think it's a little bit of an overplay by the lawyer saying that we're not going to come even if you summons us. And then the next day they summons them, right? Like, I think that's a little bit of an overplay. That's like saying, leaving your bishop open and then saying, don't take that bishop. I'm going to be using that for the end game. And then they take your bishop because you left him open, right? Like, hey, you idiots, like, don't say dumb things. And I think that it's funny that their first position is we're not going to come there. And not that they didn't back it up with anything. They just said, we're not going to do that. The lawyer says that we don't have to do that. And pretty quickly, I think maybe they're going to need some new legal advice because it seems like Parliament can do that. So anyway, here's an interesting turn. The Guelph Mercury said, public consultation is an important part of the development process, but should Guelph look to forego it if it means faster, affordable housing? So the proposal here is, should we not talk to the public for affordable housing and just build it? Or should we go through the arduous policies and arduous process of doing the public consultation? And Mayor Guthrie says, this question is framed well and has created an internal conflict for me. Process is important, not consultation for the taxpayers. Process. Housing our most vulnerable are important too. This is the dilemma. It's not a dilemma. You work for the taxpayer. You have to consult the taxpayer for how you're going to use taxpayer dollars. And if that means going through the process, if that's the process of spending taxpayer dollars on affordable housing, then yes, there shouldn't be any kind of dilemma whatsoever. And when you refuse to even acknowledge the problem is a poor immigration strategy that is not taking into account the growth of the municipalities where people are moving into, then you're not even interested in looking at the problem. Like that, you have to frame the problem in what it is. You can't just say we have to build more affordable housing. If all the affordable housing is being taken up by refugees and new immigrants and people who have grown up and lived in Guelph all their lives are being priced out of homes, that's not appropriate. It's not appropriate. We shouldn't be promising things that don't exist. We shouldn't be telling people their opportunities exist when there's no housing for them. It's not responsible. And it's not about being racist. It's about promising things that aren't here, right? Opportunity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If there's nowhere to live, right? Like if the places to live cost all of your paycheck, right? And you have nothing to live on, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. It's just crazy. And the idea of removing public consultation, I mean, even floating that is just a ridiculous idea. It's just unbelievable. Unbelievable. Okay. 19 minutes. Okay, I thought it said 32, and I thought, holy smoke, I've got a lot more to go. Okay, Ottawa to create military watchdog after allegations against top officials. It's not just one. It's not just Vance. It's the second. There's other people who have recently had to step down due to allegations of a similar nature. And so this is interesting. Ottawa is going to be creating a military watchdog. I just don't like. Who's watching these people, right? It seems like Brenda Lucki, who's the commissioner of the RCMP, has ignored obstruction of justice charges, has ignored a whole bunch of very interesting situations with our parliament, situations that got like Dalton McGuinty in trouble. I remember when the OPP came in to search for documentation that somebody had deleted, and the person who deleted the documentation went to jail. Like, this is not unprecedented, right? Where allegations have happened, and now this government is caught covering up allegations while simultaneously prosecuting somebody else. And they're saying, oh, it wasn't our fault, it was the ombudsman's fault. Now, in order to deal with this, we're going to create a watchdog. Yeah, okay, sure, right? Shakeup looms at a top Canadian military as first woman deputy to be named. So I don't know if this is supposed to be distractionary news or what, but it seems like in order to distract from Saijan being aware because the ombudsman told him, and Trudeau being aware because Saijan told the PMO, that something was happening, right? There was something, but apparently nobody knew. And in order to continue to have a palatable story to tell, well, it's International Women's Day, right? Let's replace those disgraced people, the people who were removed due to allegations, with a woman. Yay! Right? Is that good enough for the news cycle? Maybe. We'll see. How about this? PBO at a loss to explain why costs of new Canadian warship currently at $77 billion and keep rising. I don't know why it costs more money. It just does. So stop asking. Thanks. Parliamentary Budget Officer Yves Giroux produced a report February 24th outlining how the cost of Canadian surface combatant project is now estimated to be $77 billion. The controversial project to buy new warships has already faced delays and significant increases as the price tag has climbed from an original $14 billion estimated to $26 billion and then to $70 billion in 2019. Canada wants to buy 15 Type 26 ships. Giroux told MPs on Monday that part of the risk with the project comes from the decision to select the Type 26, which at the time existed only on the drawing board. Construction began on the first Type 26 frigate in the summer of 2017 for Britain's Royal Navy, but the ship is still not complete. Quote, there doesn't seem to be a clear rationale when it comes to explaining these cost increases, Giroux noted during his appearance at the Commons Government Operations Committee. I'm concerned. How do we quantify these increases? Well, I'm sure it'll double again and maybe one more time before delivery. So let's keep our expectations in check, everyone. Okay, Milhouse Van Houten said, as you read the news today, this is moving into COVID and vaccinations and all of that. As you read the news today, remember that much of Ontario, including Toronto, is still under lockdown. Yeah, we're in gray. Nothing's really been opened. Everything's really closed. And there's no way really for all of this to be Toronto's fault. But anyway, City of Toronto says, Ontario, this is March 8th. Ontario is reporting 1,631 new cases of COVID-19 today. 10 more people have died. This is the highest number of daily reported cases in a month. Goodness, back to lockdown we go. Anthony Furey is responding to a Brian Lilly tweet, and he says, about those 1,600 cases today, turns out there was another data issue, and old cases were added again by local public health units. Statement from Elliott's press secretary explains it. Apologies for not raising this sooner. We have just been informed that today's case count is higher than expected due to a data catch-up process related to the provincial CCM system. As you know, we try to get this info to you in advance of posting the numbers, but we weren't aware of this issue until just now. For questions, reach out to Public Health Ontario. And Anthony Furey says, this is unacceptable. There are already fearful headlines doing the rounds about how Ontario is reporting its highest case count in quite some time, yet we're only now learning that the number is not in fact correct. Yeah, so isn't that interesting, right? Fear-mongering news, and it's not even real. Here's Milhouse again, and he says, this is a trap, don't fall for it. Michelle Rempel is fooling you into thinking we need mass testing and mass vaccinations to end lockdowns. With this plan, we'll never regain our freedoms. Follow Texas and Florida. We can literally end lockdowns right now and be fine. And I'm going to show you, I've got a list of new states that have opened today, this morning and last night since my show yesterday. And it's crazy. There's so many states that are opening. I think I have 3 new states to show you. And as the states open, there's less and less tolerance for the continued lockdowns. My daughter said, why can't we open up then? And I said, oh, honey, I wish I knew. I wish I knew. But the vaccines are not the answer. The vaccines aren't even the answer in Israel. Here's Alex Brenson. He says the Israeli vaccine miracle is officially over before it even began. Now serious cases rose week after week and have barely fallen for new serious cases, rose week over week and have barely fallen for 2 weeks. So February 13th to 20th, 699, February 20th to 26th, 643, February 27th to March 5th, 660. After falling for much of February, total serious cases haven't budged in the last 10 days. Overall positive tests are rising, R's above 1, indicating the epidemic is spreading. This comes with most adults vaccinated and nearly the entire high-risk population fully vaccinated. The mRNA vaccine is very obviously far less than 95% protective. So how effective are they based on changes in overall hospitalizations and, more importantly, the median age of hospitalized people? A smart finance guy puts them at 70 to 75% protected a week after the second dose, which is probably peak protection. I'll let him explain. Because older people were vaccinated first, the median age of hospitalized patients should have dropped fast in Israel in January and February. It did drop, but much more slowly than would have been expected if the vaccine were actually 95% or even 75% effective. Deaths have also dropped more slowly than they should have, but death data are complicated because there can be a significant lag between the day a death happens and the day it's reported. Hospitalizations are a better real-time measure. By the way, if peak protection is 75%, overall protection will be far lower since the vaccine offers no protection for weeks after the first dose and may even increase risk, and that 75% is not likely to last long. So that's interesting information out of Israel, right? And unverified, right? Make sure that's speculative at this point in time. That's by no means a peer-reviewed paper or conclusion to draw. That's this person's conclusion. But I think that it's interesting to note, right? And interesting to pay attention to within the context of, here's Aaron O'Toole, and he says that we need to get vaccines, right? Again, not many people are listening to him. 200 likes, 34 retweets. Today is a somber anniversary in Canada as we remember the first Canadian death from COVID-19. Since then, 22,258 Canadians have died from coronavirus. I always think of the families who have experienced the loss of a loved one from this terrible disease. Interesting to note that he uses a different word for this one and starts off with COVID-19, right? Deaths from COVID-19, people died from coronavirus. Weird. That's interesting. Who vetted this tweet, right? Really, honestly. Reflecting on this time, I think about how we had not heard of terms like physical distancing. Most of us did not know how to unmute on Zoom, and we didn't realize the toll this virus would take in our communities. Last March, I had 2 kids in school learning about the new normal at the same time as me. Now we're pros at working remotely, and I'm proud to see the independence and maturity that my children have demonstrated throughout this crisis. Now the end is in sight. 1 year ago, a vaccine was a distant dream, one-day discussion. Now we have 4 approved vaccines for use in Canada to help Canadians get back on their feet and get back to work. We have a lot of work to do to get our economy back on track, but I'm optimistic about Canada's future. And again, right, like he's talking about the vaccines as the key to unlocking. Why can't we unlock with the data that we've got now? Honestly, yeah, and I'm going to talk about the lockdowns next, I think, because I think that makes more sense. But Dr. Henry in BC says US CDC guidelines where people who have had both vaccine doses can hold small maskless gatherings with people in their home, including those who haven't been vaccinated, are reasonable guidelines, and BC's will be very similar, but province not there yet. So if there are different rules for vaccinated people, I imagine we'll get more panic to jump the queue, get appointments as early as possible. But you can't do that. You can't set different. This is a medical apartheid. You cannot set different rules. Are there different rules is it legal? And this is not legal, but it is not legal to set different rules for somebody who is not vaccinated against measles, mumps, or rubella in an employment situation. That is their private medical information, and there is no need or legal framework to do that to a person. Doing this is wrong. And the fact that the public health official doesn't see that is very concerning. I'll leave it at that. You can't do that. You cannot do that. Ontario nowhere near loosening rules for fully vaccinated people despite new guidelines in the US. Dr. Yaff, right? This is where you lose people on vaccinations. If there's no difference in restrictions, then what's the point? There's no difference in restrictions. They can't legally do that. They're not allowed. They're not allowed. Here's moving into lockdowns. New peer review study in Nature, stay-at-home policy is a case of exception fallacy. In 98% of comparisons using 87 different regions of the world, we found no evidence that the number of deaths in the millions is reduced by staying at home. And I think it comes to like a 1.3% variance or something like that. Like it helped by 1.3%, and that's not enough. Even if it helped by 20%, not enough to justify the loss of our civil liberties and freedoms. Not even close. Arizona's open. All Arizona businesses are reopening at 100% capacity. That's March 5th. Here is 14 hours ago. Democrat governor announces that restaurants, retail stores, houses of worship, and other businesses will be allowed to reopen at full capacity. That's Connecticut. Connecticut as of March 19. I think Wyoming announces end to lockdown, lifts mask mandate. That's 3. Here is an Irish barrister, Tracy O'Mahony, is commencing a case against the state this week, challenging almost all of Ireland's lockdown restrictions. People are fed up with this garbage. And still, right? Conrad Black says, our politicians have failed us through lockdowns and a lack of vaccines. Vaccines aren't the answer. They're not the answer. Here's a selection of people who, like this guy's a newspaper guy. I think he's a managing director. Oh, no, he's not. CFA Portfolio Management Corporation, avid golfer. And he says, I'm 100% behind vaccine passports. I want to live my life again as normal as possible. And the best way is for as many people as possible to be vaccinated. If you choose not to get one, then there should be a price for you to pay. And if this pisses off idiot redneck Hillier, great. Right, sure. And Hillier is saying, just like the Soviet Union, China, and North Korea, the state will now decide if you're safe and permitted to travel abroad. Terrible, terrifying, right? Terrifying situation to be in, because this is not how Canada works. Sorry, I'm having a window put in, so that's what's going on. Hold on, I'll pause it. Here is challenges to the hotel or the mandatory hotel stays. And it says people who believe that these rules are inappropriate, particularly when applied to their circumstances, have every right to fight these tickets, says Carol Zwiebel. Sorry if I got that wrong. Director of Fundamental Freedom Project program at the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. So there are people fighting against these hotel stays. The CCF has filed legal challenge of the federal quarantine hotel policy. Read about it here. So it is a good thing. But I wonder where the class actions are. I wonder where maybe it's difficult to recruit for something like that. I'm not sure. Anyway, this is a follow-up from the nurse who walked through Pearson Airport and was saying, I'm not going to do what you say. I'm not going to quarantine. I'm not going to take your test. I'm going home, etc. And she created a bit of a firestorm. There were a lot of people talking about her, and everybody's trying to make political hay out of things like this. So it's interesting that the Toronto Sun followed up, and apparently she went to Tanzania to help, and she's been a nurse for 10 years, etc. Interesting story, and interesting to see how the media spins it. Here's another media spin. Guelph Mercury says, hefty fines have been held up by provincial and other officials as a way to help enforce social distancing and other COVID-19 related rules. Do you think they're working? That's a lie. It's not true. It's not true. It actually says in the article something different. Only 18% of COVID-19 charges laid in Ontario since last March have been dealt with by the justice system by the end of January, leaving hundreds of thousands of dollars in unpaid fines outstanding nearly a year or so into the pandemic. Only 990 of the 5,584 charges laid since March 2020 have been dealt with, fines being paid, the charges withdrawn, or another disposition as of January 2021. I scroll down a little bit. The STAR analysis of the data shows that few have been forced to pay since an emergency was first declared last year. Thousands of fines were handed out across the province. The vast majority of people have not yet faced any consequences. And in Alberta, I forgot to get this tab, and I'm not going to go get it now. I've got lots to do. But in Alberta, they're throwing out a bunch of cases, a bunch of charges, etc., just being thrown out. A lot of people are speculating they're not constitutional, and they know they won't win, so they're just throwing them out. I don't know what's true, but it's very interesting that this is number one, this is true, that there's been very few people who have actually followed through with the charges, and probably a lot of these people just paid the charges to get it over with, right? Because, they're law-abiding citizens, right? And so I'll be interested to see what the numbers look like when these actually start showing up in court. But the other thing to note about this is the media messaging here. And I mean, I highlighted this too. I was like, come on, guys. But it's funny, the headline here, right? Hefty fines have been held up by provincial and other officials as a way to help enforce distancing. They haven't been held up by anybody. They haven't been, and that's what the article is about, that they haven't been held up, that nobody's paid, they haven't faced any consequences. Misleading headline. This article sums up how our disastrously wrong COVID-19 adventure will seed long-term distrust for public health and government. The implications are serious to societal cohesion, the collapse of trust in public health. Somebody sent this to me, and I've skimmed this article. I haven't read it yet, so I'm just referencing it for you to read. I think that there is a catastrophic collapse in the public trust, the trust in democracy, the trust in officials doing what's best for us versus officials' job to maintain our freedoms and our civil liberties, right? Like, you don't get to pick and choose when to remove or when to stand up for the civil liberties. It's whenever they're threatened, you should be saying, no, you can't do this. You can't do this to people, right? And why are there only a handful of MPs and MPPs standing up saying, like, it's been a year, like, enough of this. This is insane. You haven't proven the emergency that we're basing this whole thing on exists. There's a Belinda Cariolis clip talking about exactly that from November 2020, right? And what's been done? Nothing, right? They've doubled down, tripled down, right? More emergencies. We're definitely going to get a handle on this in the next 6 months. Meanwhile, places keep opening, right? Adam Vaughan says Pierre Poilievre just blamed the opioid tragedy on joblessness, not on the CPC headquarters, the Conservative Party of Canada's long-standing opposition to harm reduction practices and facilities. Cuts to housing and cuts to street-focused health teams literally suggested if we built more pipelines, we'd have fewer overdose deaths. If you built more pipelines, you'd have more jobs. More people would be employed rather than sitting around wasting away in places where opium is easy to get and a job is much more difficult. And here's the reality of this situation. 15 people died in Guelph in 2020 of overdose. COVID killed 14 people in Guelph, right, of COVID, up to December 25th. Maybe just at the end it got over 15, I'm not sure. But it's a pretty incredible situation. Sorry, Windows. It's a pretty incredible situation to shut down the entire country for the same number of deaths as the overdose deaths in the city, right? Like, the whole country's been shut down. The whole province has been shut down. Lockdown orders, stay in your home. Everybody's at risk. Same amount of deaths as the opium overdose. And we had a safe injection site in 2019, killed 7 people. 2020 killed 15 people. More than 100% increase in opium overdose deaths. Is this a good use of our money? How is it being measured? Nobody wants to answer those questions. Here's a good video. I watched it at 2 times speed, and it's well done. Canadian doctors speak out. There are 6 Canadian doctors discussing all sorts of various parts of this. Go watch this video. It's worthwhile. It was on YouTube. It got removed from YouTube. It got removed from Twitter. It's got 5,000 views on this, which is great. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's worth it. Share it. The World Health Organization has recommended against wearing face masks while exercising. Oh, print this off. It's global news. Global news, right? Have you seen... If you haven't seen Super Straight has nothing to do with this at all, but go check out the Super Straight hashtag, right? The reason Global News led me to Super Straight is Global News is a legitimate, it's like CNN, it's like a legitimate news source for everyone, right? Like, if you share a Global News source, it's true. Whereas maybe like the Epoch Times is people would look at that and be skeptical, right? Anyway, I don't know why that connected to Super Straight, but the Super Straight thing is made me laugh yesterday. It doesn't have anything to do with anything that I'm talking about right now, but just check it out. It's very interesting. Anyway, COVID-19 magnified systemic discrimination against Indigenous women. Really? Really? I said, for sure, only the women like clean drinking water. Well researched. Honestly, like, what? What? We've got a situation where the Liberal government promised in 2015, we're going to spend money. Justin Trudeau, just like Phoenix Pay, he personally is going to make sure that every Indigenous place where people are living has fresh water. And now they're saying the pandemic discriminated against Indigenous women. Ha! Magnified the systemic discrimination against Indigenous women. It's just so ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It is divisive, racist ridiculousness. And it has no place in a serious newspaper. And the division being sown by our media is incredible. This doesn't help anybody. This doesn't help Indigenous women who are being told they're a victim. This doesn't help get better policies. This doesn't hold anybody accountable for their failures. It doesn't do anything. All it does is propagate victimhood mentality. Terrible. Awful. What an awful, awful thing to have our newspapers do. Brampton Transit's unlawful, illogical bullying of drivers has escalated to absurdly requiring that all submit to fraudulent, meaningless testing or self-isolate indefinitely. So yeah, the Transit Authority is asking the drivers to, those who have not been tested will be required to self-isolate as recommended by Peel Public Health during the course of the investigation. And it goes through, it says to all staff, COVID-19 testing complete, next steps. So it's talking about the process to go through getting your COVID test and blah, 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 blah. Rocco Galati, people were using Rocco Galati's video to respond to this, that demanding a DNA test for employment is not legal in Canada. I don't think that it matters anymore. I don't think that the people care about that anymore. I think that there are people who think they're doing the work that's expected of them to keep other people safe from COVID-19, and they're being told by the media that this is good work, and they don't give a shit. They don't care. They don't care if it damages your basic rights. They don't care if they're breaking the law. The only thing that matters to the media, and the only thing that matters to the people who pay attention to the media as if it's true, right? Like I was referring to the Global News earlier, is the COVID-19 and the COVID-19 numbers and safety from COVID-19. It doesn't matter if they smoke a pack a day and eat 4 Big Macs for dinner. That is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about COVID-19. You better wear your mask, buddy. Well, they take off their mask to smoke their, second pack they started. It's 9:30 p.m., right? Anyway, very interesting, right? Lockdown caused a spike in domestic abuse. Calls to assaulted women helpline doubled. Shelters are full. Today on International Women's Day, Roman Baber asked the Minister of Children and Women's Issues if she agrees that ending the lockdown will help many women be safer at home. She has an answer. I'm not going to play it. I'll play the question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Associate Minister of Children and Women's Issues. Minister, today we mark and celebrate the International Women's Day. Like all of our colleagues, I'm astonished and saddened by the spike in domestic partner violence over the last year. I refer you to a February 15th article by the Canadian Press regarding the continued rise in domestic violence. Canada's Assaulted Women Helpline fielded over 20,000 calls between October 1 and December 31, 2020, compared to 12,000 calls during the same period in 2019. Quote, "Everything closed overnight and our crisis lines lit up," said Yvonne Harding, a manager at the organization. There were limited supports for women beforehand, but at least they had outlets. They had opportunities to leave the house to get help, such as daily trips to and from school, and less access to family and friends are leaving victims with fewer options. Minister, instead of citing dollar figures and statistics as to what the government claims to have done to stop the rise in domestic violence, I'd like to ask if you'd agree with me that ending the lockdown would immediately help many women to be safer at home.
The Associate Minister of Women and Children's Issues.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for that question. I think it was about a year ago that I visited the shelter in your region with the D'Amico family, and thank you for the contributions that they have made. I'd also like to thank the frontline workers.
Liberals just talk and talk and talk. They don't answer questions they don't like. They'll just use it as a jumping off point to push their agenda items, right? Just like the NDP and the women, right? They use the women as the Trojan horse and start talking about their issues. Pivot, right? Just like, and this is kind of funny too, right? Do you see why this is funny? Is it obvious yet? This is not a dumpster, right? The big gray box back there, that's full of fossil fuels. That's full of diesel, right? And just in case the sun isn't shining or for whatever reason the grid is not gridding, I guess. I'm not sure why they have a diesel generator for the electric. Well, maybe they don't want to overload the electric grid, right? Maybe that's why they've got the diesel generator, right? This diesel generator will serve that so long as there's diesel in there. Blah blah blah. We'll refill the diesel every so often. But that's funny, right? Like you see it behind the white car there, right? Diesel generator. Yeah, we've got to have those charging stations. Fossil fuel power generator in the back room, moron. Yep, there it is, right? Our green energy revolution. Do you own a diesel generator company? You should. Here is speech censorship. This is happening. I would usually spend like 10 minutes going through this. The Liberals, this is a thread itemizing the Liberals' attempts at already and moves to consult with limiting free speech online, shutting down free speech online, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're making the moves to do this. I'll go through this quickly, I suppose. Earlier today, S. Guilbeault, he's the Minister of Heritage Minister, claimed that the Liberals had no plans to censor Canadians on social media. Here's why he's not telling the whole truth. In his mandate letter, Trudeau directed the minister to make regulating hate speech online a top priority. How do the Liberals define hate speech? Well, it will be partially based on a Human Rights Commission ruling, which includes truthful statements. While Bill C-10 is in its current form doesn't include regulations on online hate speech, Guilbeault has indicated such a bill is coming in the next few weeks. Such a law would create a new regulator who would be tasked with enforcing the government's definition of hate speech. For some time now, the Liberals have been flirting with the idea of reviving Section 13 of the Human Rights Code, which would expand human rights protections to online content. During a study on the matter, Liberal MP Bainate proposed ticketing people who post offensive content online. AG David Lametti has also already begun consulting with groups to find legal remedies for offensive and unregulated speech online. In 2020 consultation letter, the department asked organizations for their opinion on how to punish hate speech offenders. To recap, the Liberals want to regulate offensive hate speech online, define hateful content based on a ruling that includes truthful statements, have proposed ticketing punishing offenders, are undergoing consultations to find legal remedies for offensive content. They're trying to limit speech. The other interesting thing about this is there was a report that concluded, and I don't have the link for this, but it was on X22 yesterday, the day before, talking about how online discussions don't turn into violence. And it was a robust report. And again, I'm just referencing off the top of my head, so I apologize I don't have the link. But it blows holes in this. The need to do this, right? They're saying the need to do this is urgent because the white supremacists are going to riot. Well, the white supremacists apparently rioted. There was a lot of Antifa among the white supremacists, mind you, but they rioted on January 6th, and then they went home, right? And it was like by 6 o'clock, the whole thing was done. They were supposed to riot again on January 20th, but nothing happened. They were supposed to riot again on March 4th, right? But nothing happened. So what? Like, and regardless of all of that, the idea that people don't have the right to freely express themselves online is patently ridiculous, is unbelievably crazy, and the government should be invalidated. Any government that suggests, we know what is correct and wrong for people to talk about and think, and so we're going to regulate that online. Any government that says that should be dropped automatically, should invalidate themselves. If you cross that line, that's that. Sorry about your luck. Ridiculous. Parks Canada proposes to introduce Mandarin language programs in celebration of a great Canadian hero, Maoist propaganda figure Dr. Norman Bethune. I don't know who Dr. Norman Bethune is, but that's interesting, right? Isn't that interesting? Somebody said part of our reset, right? Like part of our heritage. Ah, yes. Right. Welcome to Canada, right? And here's this didn't really fit anywhere, but I wanted to include it. A letter supporting a ban to critical race. A letter supporting a bill to ban critical race theory. It says this bill helps support that fundamentally equal and fair treatment before the law, which is currently at risk. And it's at risk because they're trying to use critical race theory to demonize specific races while saying these other races are worthwhile. And it's not appropriate. It's not appropriate. Critical race theory specifically calls out the white race, and I think that that's interesting. Like, I think it's interesting in the full-throated enthusiasm with which people are adopting it, specifically the Upper Grand District School Board. You can look at my 7-part series on that if you're interested. But they embrace this in a demographic that has 93% white teachers. They're saying to these white teachers, like, any system built by white people is inherently racist because it was built by white people. And my question is, how can you possibly hold that position as a school board? How can you possibly hold that racist position? How can you say that to your trustees? How can you say that to your teachers? How can you say that racism is to blame when demographics are clearly to blame? It's damaging. It's a damaging racist system that's being implemented across the world. And I'm glad that people are speaking out about it. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com, check out CanadaReport.co, check out SpeakingMoistly.co, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.